Hey everyone, welcome. We'll just give it a few minutes to allow others to join. Thanks for being here today. Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming this afternoon. We're going to get started in just a few minutes to allow others to join. So just hang tight. Thanks again. All right, good afternoon everyone. Thanks for joining us. I think we can get started now. My name is Amy Salata. I'm the Outreach and Advocacy Manager at the Student Borrower Protection Center, and we're a national nonprofit policy organization focused solely on alleviating the burden of student debt in the country. We do this through a mixture of advocacy, policymaking, and litigation strategy to rein in industry abuses, protect borrowers' rights, and advance economic opportunity for the next generation of students. Later, I'll be joined by my colleague Ella, who will be helping with Q&A. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the Q&A feature. That's the easiest way to kind of sift through them. So that would be great if you don't mind putting them there. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so don't be shy. Feel free to ask any questions that come up. We can only kind of give general program information, and so if your question is hyper-specific, we probably won't be able to answer it, but we'll try to give you all the tools that you that are available to help you answer your question. So with that, let's get started. There's a lot of information, a lot of stuff happening right now. All right, so here's what's on the agenda for today. So we're going to go over any updates on, President Biden's debt relief plan. We're going to go over the IDR account adjustment and how that interacts with public service loan forgiveness, review what Fresh Start is and how to prepare for a return to repayment, which I'm sure is top of folks' minds right now. And then we'll review any important takeaways and then go through some of your questions. All right, let's get started. So first, we'll go over the recent Supreme Court decision that came down in June and how that affects the debt relief plan that President Biden initiated last year. So as you might recall, this was the plan that would have provided up to $20,000 in relief for anyone who used a Pell Grant at any point in their educational career, and then up to $10,000 in relief for all other federal borrowers. The application was opened very briefly at the end of 2022. And, when I say briefly, it was a matter of weeks. And during that time, 26 million people applied, which really speaks to the necessity and the popularity of a plan like this. And during that time, 16 million people were already processed. They were in the queue. They were just waiting for their debt relief to happen. As you know, a federal judge in Texas and a panel of judges in Missouri blocked President Biden's debt relief plan, and then the Supreme Court knocked it down in June of this year under the HEROES Act. So right now, there's nothing happening right now with this debt relief plan. But the good news is that President Biden has announced he's going to try to get it across the finish line using the Higher Education Act. Now, using the Higher Education Act requires something called a negotiated rulemaking process, and this will take several months to figure out. Basically, they come up with a committee of folks that are both advocates, people from industry, some borrowers, to try to figure out what the parameters of this program might look like. So this is going to be happening this fall. And so it will be several months before we know the guidelines, but there are some things that you can do right now in order to manage your debt and to get in some cancellation programs that are already in existence. And so we're going to review some of those today. So first is something called the IDR account adjustment. IDR stands for income-driven repayment. Those are plans that are based on or pegged to your income instead of the entire balance of your loan. And so they're often more affordable for folks because they're based on your income and not the entire balance, as I just mentioned. Under these plans, you're eligible to have your debt forgiven after 20 or 25 years in repayment. This is how the plan was set up or how these plans were set up because, folks were getting really distressed. The nice thing about income-driven repayment plans are that, they're lower monthly payments, but with that, you might not be touching the principal, you might not even be touching all of the interest on your loan. And so you're doing everything right. You're logging into your account and you're still seeing your balance continue to balloon. So this can be really distressing for folks, right? So that's why they made it so that after 20 or 25 years in repayment, you can get the entire balance of your loan wiped out. So last year, a Government Accountability Office report and some other reports came out that income-driven repayment plans and particularly cancellation under these plans hasn't been working. Only fewer than 200 people have ever received cancellation under these IDR plans, and that's out of our universe of about 4 million people. In addition, we knew that servicers were routinely steering people into deferments and forbearances instead of offering income-driven repayment plans. And so there were a lot of problems with this. So to rectify this, the Department of Education is doing something called the IDR account adjustment, which is what we're going to talk about now. Basically, what they're doing is a one-time audit of all accounts, and they're going to be counting any time in repayment status and some of these other categories here, like forbearances and deferments. Basically, any time that you've spent in repayment, with the exception of in-school deferment and default. They'll count any other time outside of that. And that is like for credit towards these thresholds of 20 or 25 years. So that you can get your debt canceled after that amount of time. It's 20 years for those who only took out undergraduate loans, and then 25 years for folks who have a mixture of undergraduate and graduate loans. So they're counting all this time. And one of the really nice things is that you can get credit that accrues before your consolidation, which is not typically true. So usually if you consolidate, which is like refinancing with the federal government, it takes out a new loan, pays off your old loan, and then you have that new loan balance that is a new direct loan. So usually when that happens, you start back at zero for any time that you've accrued towards cancellation under kind of income-driven repayment plans or public service loan forgiveness. But one of the really nice things about right now is that you can keep that credit from before the consolidation. For most folks, this is going to be automatic. But for some folks, they're going to need to consolidate, particularly if you have commercial FFEL loans and Perkins loans. You have to consolidate your loans in order to take advantage of this IDR account adjustment. And then one of the other really nice things about the IDR account adjustment is that any credit that you get towards this IDR account adjustment, like towards cancellation under IDR plans, also counts as PSLF credit. So that's really helpful for folks that are in public service loan forgiveness, or like in the public service seeking PSLF. And we'll get to kind of more nitty-gritty about how those interact in a little bit, but you might be thinking right now, like, how do I know if I even have these commercial FFEL or Perkins loans and need to consolidate? So we're just going to do briefly on what that looks like and how you find that out. So the first thing you'll want to do is log into studentaid.gov, and you'll want to look at your dashboard once you're there. Also, if you don't have your studentaid.gov password, you can reset it. It's fairly easy to log in, but this will be like your clearinghouse of all your information on your student loans. You can also download your aid data, which will download a text file of basically any like student aid history that you have. But your dashboard will also tell you this. So you can just go to your dashboard, and this is what it's going to look like. It'll show you all of the loans you have, and then any previous ones that were paid off. So here we can see that this person already consolidated and they already have 2 direct loans. Direct loans have been the main loan type since 2010. So if you went to school after 2010, you likely have a direct loan already. If you went to school prior to 2010, you might have a mixture of other loans as well. Or, many folks have a smattering of many different loans. And so it's hard to generalize here, but you can see that there are 2 direct consolidation loans. And then these other loans all have $0 balances. So they've already been paid off. We don't need to worry about those because they've already been paid off. So we're just really looking at these loans with a balance. Before, you can see this person had a Perkins loan. They would have needed to consolidated that to partake in the IDR account adjustment. And it also doesn't matter if these loans are unsubsidized or subsidized. That's not the part that matters. You're really looking for these FFEL loans that are federal family education loans. That's a now defunct loan program, but there's still some of these loans that are floating out in the world. And you need to find out if they are held by the Department of Education or held by a private lender. So let's look at what that looks like. So again, these are federal family education loans, or FFELP loans for short. Here you can see in this second block here, Wells Fargo Bank is listed as the servicer. That's an example of a private lender. So you know that this is a commercially held FFELP loan in this category over here. This last block down here says Department of Ed MOHELA. And so that is an example of an ed held, or a Department of Education held FFELP loan. Another easy way to tell whether you have these commercial FFEL loans or you have these education department held loans is if you've been receiving the payment pause for the past 3.5 years. So if you have been, not required to make payments during the payment pause, then you have these loans that are held by the Department of Education. And if you have been required to make payments, then you likely have these commercial FFELP loans, and you'll need to consolidate them in order to take part in the IDR account adjustment. So I know this is confusing. Happy to answer more questions at the end about this. But these are some ways that you can tell whether or not you need to consolidate to take part in this. So let's review very briefly what you have to do for this IDR account adjustment. So first, check what type of loans you have at studentaid.gov. Any loans that are not currently held by the department, so those commercial held FFEL loans, will need to be consolidated before December 31st of this year. This deadline is super important because it is the deadline, so I remember I said that with consolidation, you can keep that past credit. If you consolidate after this date, you won't be able to keep the credit on your loan that you currently have. So super important to consolidate before December 31st of 2023. And the Department of Education has already begun making adjustments through this IDR account adjustment. The first swath of this was announced this summer. President Biden announced that over 800,000 people would receive debt cancellation to the tune of like $39 billion. So it's really exciting to see this play out in real time. And they've started, adjusting the accounts of folks who have been in repayment the longest. So those people who have already crossed the threshold of 20 or 25 years. All other accounts are going to be adjusted next year, particularly to account for this deadline of December 31st for the consolidation deadline. And so, folks next year should see their accounts being adjusted with these updated numbers, based on the forbearances or deferments that you've had, things like that. So happy to answer more questions at the end about the IDR account adjustment, but this is just a little background on what you need to do to take part in it. All right, next we're going to go into public service loan forgiveness and how this interacts with the IDR account adjustment. So public service loan forgiveness was created. It's a program that was created in 2007 by Congress to really help people who were struggling with student debt in the public service, and then just make it so that folks wouldn't be deterred from entering the public service because of their student loan balances. To put it simply, PSLF is the promise that if a borrower works in public service for 10 years and makes payments on their loans during that time, they can get the remainder of their debt canceled. So here's how the program typically works. Usually there are 4 requirements. Here they are. So the first is you need to have the right type of loan, which is a direct loan. Again, those loans are the main loans that have been in existence since 2010. If you don't have a direct loan, if you have one of those FFELP loans that I just mentioned, a Perkins loan, some other loan types, you are able to consolidate those loans in order to make them eligible for public service loan forgiveness. So, you can consolidate your loans to turn them into direct loans to make them eligible. The second requirement is that you have to be in the right type of repayment plan, which for most folks is going to be an income-driven repayment plan. We just kind of reviewed a little bit about what those do, but there are 4 plans that currently fall under the umbrella of income-driven repayment. There's income-based repayment, or IBR, income contingent repayment, or ICR, PAY, which is like an acronym for pay as you earn, and then REPAY, which is revised pay as you earn. Those are the 4 plans that fall under IDR. We'll get to this in a little bit, but the REPAY plan is going to be replaced by something called the SAVE plan, which is a plan that President Biden announced last year. So we'll get into what that looks like in a little bit, but for right now, those are the 4 plans that qualify for IDR. Third, you need to be in the right type of employment, and that is with a public service employer. You need to be working full-time, which is defined as 30 hours a week. And a public service employer is defined as any level of government, so that's federal, state, local, or tribal governments, any 501c3 nonprofit, or certain other nonprofits also qualify under this. And what that usually looks like is something like emergency services. Maybe it's not a part of the government, or maybe it's not coded as a 501c3 with the IRS, but you're obviously doing work for the community. So that's something that kind of falls under like other nonprofit work. That is acceptable for public service loan forgiveness. Finally, you need to make the right number of payments, which is 120 payments. And you need to make those payments while meeting all the other requirements. So 120 payments on a direct loan while in an income-driven repayment plan while working for the public service. The nice thing about the 120 payments is that it doesn't have to be consecutive. It's just cumulative. So if you work for the public service for 5 years and then take time off or go to the private sector for a bit, you can come back and pick up where you left off. That time in the private sector won't count, but you are able to kind of continue accruing credits after that. One of the really nice things about the payment pause is that all of that time, so that 3.5 years, counts towards those 120 payments, even though we haven't been required to make payments. But you still need to meet the other criteria. And the most relevant is that you're working for a public service employer during this time. Now here's where we're going to talk a little bit about how PSLF and the IDR account adjustment interact a bit. Essentially, what this means is that they're waiving these first 2 requirements. So if you didn't previously have a direct loan, now is a great time to consolidate, to get a direct loan, to keep that past credit on your loan and apply it to the new loan. And if you weren't already enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan, it's a great time to get on one in order to get on track for public service loan forgiveness. So essentially these first 2 pieces are like being waived in this exact moment in time so that folks can get more credit towards PSLF. Something to think about is that this is not completely automatic. A lot of these government programs aren't automatic, unfortunately. So again, if you have those FFEL or Perkins loans, you have to consolidate them into direct loans in order to make them eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And the deadline for that is the same as the IDR account adjustment, December 31st. If you consolidate after December 31st, you'll get a weighted average of payments that you've made on a direct loan. And so you won't get as much credit as you would if you consolidate before December 31st. And then if you haven't already filed PSLF forms for your employment, you can do that. There's no timeline for that. There's no deadline for that. You can do that at any time. We recommend that you do it every year that you're in public service, that you do it every time you switch public service jobs. You don't have to do this. You could document everything after 10 years, but there were a lot of historical issues with the public service loan forgiveness program. And so by filing a form every year and every time you change jobs, it's a great way to catch any mistakes that are made. And there have been a lot of historical mistakes made with the public service loan forgiveness program. All right. One note is that Parent Plus borrowers, these are borrowers who take out loans for their children's education that are in their name, but they benefit their children's education. These folks are able to get PSLF credit through the IDR account adjustment now. This wasn't previously the case. They've been excluded from a number of things in the past, but this was really good news that was announced at the end of 2022. So the action items for Parent Plus borrowers are similar, but a little different. You know, like everyone else, you'll have to submit PSLF forms for any past public service employment that you've had since October 1st, 2007. And you'll have as many, this applies for everyone, but you'll have as many forms as you've had employers since October 1st of 2007. You can't get any credit before October 1st, 2007, because that's when the program was founded, but you can get all that credit since 2007. And then the other thing for Parent Plus borrowers is that you can consider consolidating to get on an income-driven repayment plan if you haven't already reached 10 years in public service. So this gets a little tricky because, as I mentioned, IDR plans are eligible for public service loan forgiveness. The other plan that is eligible for public service loan forgiveness is the standard plan. The standard plan is a plan that you get placed into immediately after you graduate and your kind of grace period ends. And that is the plan that has you paying off the entirety of your debt in 10 years. So it's, if you have a very high balance, it could be a very high monthly payment for folks. The reason that folks need to think about this, if you have Parent Plus loans, is that the only income-driven repayment plan that Parent Plus borrowers are eligible for is the ICR plan, and it is the least generous of the plans. And so it would be a good idea to, go on studentaid.gov, check out the loan simulator tool that they have there. You can punch in your numbers and figure out what's going to be best for you, what's going to be most affordable for you. Is it the income contingent repayment plan, or would it be the standard plan? Particularly too, because for the past 3.5 years, you haven't had to make payments. And so that's just something that you can consider if you are a Parent Plus borrower. Happy to answer more questions at the end. I know this is a lot of information. Remember this deadline, December 31st is the deadline to consolidate your loans if you want to keep all that credit on your loan. All right, let's review very quickly how to get PSLF credit through this IDR account adjustment. So first, check what type of loans you have on studentaid.gov. If you have non-direct loans, remember to consolidate them before December 31st, 2023. That's the way that you keep all your past credit on your loans. If you, of course, if you consolidate after this deadline, the program is still in existence. The PSLF program is still in existence. It's just that you won't get as much credit as you would otherwise if you consolidate before this deadline. If you have Parent Plus loans, use the loan simulator tool to figure out what the most affordable plan will be moving forward. And then submit all your PSLF forms for any eligible public service work that you've had since October 1st of 2007. All right. Now we're going to get into something called Fresh Start. This is an initiative to help folks that are in default. There are about 7 million people in default right now, or prior to the pandemic who were in default. No one should be in default right now because of different guidelines that came out during the pandemic. But as we move into repayment, this will likely change. And so this is a way for folks to get out of default more quickly. And just as background, default happens when you haven't made payments for 9 months. You're placed into this status, called default. It really deteriorates your credit. It prevents people from getting cars and houses and all sorts of things. And so really detrimental. And so this is meant to be a way to get out of default more quickly. And when you're in default, there are typically two ways out of default. You could either consolidate or you could rehabilitate. Consolidation, we've already kind of gone over. That's a fairly simple process, but rehabilitation is a process, that takes about 10 months. There's a monitoring period where the Department of Education is making sure you can make your payments. It's a pretty onerous process. And so this is meant to be a quicker, easier way out of default. What Fresh Start does is it immediately restores your payment options, including those income-driven repayment plans. And if you have, a low income, you might even qualify for a $0 a month payment. And so that's going to be life-changing for a lot of folks. It also immediately restores your ability to go get aid and go back to school if you want to, which, previously wasn't the case. Folks couldn't go back to school. And if you use that one-time rehabilitation option that I mentioned, that like 10-month period of monitoring, it'll get restored if you used it during the payment pause. And then, it'll restore your credit, and it protects folks from involuntary collections as well. So these are the eligible defaulted loans. These loans must have been in default prior to March 13th, 2020, when the payment pause began. No one should have been in default during the payment pause because of some Department of Education guidance. But that date is important because if you default in the future, these loans won't be eligible for Fresh Start. But anyone's prior to the pandemic are eligible for Fresh Start. These are some ineligible defaulted loans. This is a smaller slice of the pie, but just want to mention it here in case it applies to anyone. And then, like many of these things, there are some action items you need to take part in Fresh Start. So borrowers have 1 year to do one of two things in order to take part in Fresh Start. You could either communicate with the Default Resolution Group, that's DRG, or your guarantee agency, and request to enter a repayment plan. Or you could request aid at an eligible school, so that if you wanted to go back to school, you could request aid there. And then if you use that option, schools will just get a signed statement from you saying that you agree to be transferred to a non-default servicer. If you don't do one of these action items within the next year, and when I say next year, it's the year from when the payment pause ended until next year. So it's essentially until next September. If you don't do one of these action items, you'll be placed back in default using the original date of delinquency on your loan. Again, happy to answer more questions about this if you have them on Fresh Start. Okay, I think this is our final bucket of information. We're going to talk a little bit about return to repayment, given that we're kind of in the throes of that right now, and I'm sure it's at the top of your mind. So the payment pause ended on August 30th of this year. This means that interest started accruing on September 1st, and payments will be due sometime in October. You should receive a bill from your servicer 21 days before those payments are due. So I would, you could log into your servicer's account to see if you've received a bill. You might have received it by email or in the mail. So I would remain pretty vigilant to see when that first payment is due, because it's kind of rolling. There's no like direct time on it, just happening sometime in October. So I would just check to make sure you're on track to pay that bill or receive that bill in October. And then, log into studentaid.gov, log into your servicer's account, update your contact information. So many folks moved during the pandemic that it's a good idea to make sure that they have all the correct information. Okay, so for income-driven repayment plans, with those plans, you have to recertify your income every year so that they can kind of figure out what the calculation is for monthly payments. And so these have been extended, and folks have about 6 months to recertify them. So sometime, in the next, or like 6 months from now, you'll need to recertify your income-driven repayment plans. But just remember to do this if you were enrolled, because otherwise you'll get automatically placed onto the standard plan, which might be a really high monthly payment for you. And then one other thing is that automatic payments should have been stopped. So if you were doing automatically debited payments before the pandemic. The Department of Education has said that they're not gonna automatically restart those. People have to proactively enroll in those again. So if that's something of interest to you, you should enroll in one of those. And I mentioned this, because the Department of Education has stated that they're not going to do this, so it might be a good idea to make sure that these kind of debits aren't being taken out of your bank account when the time comes too. A couple of other things. So there is an on-ramp period for the next year that will last until September 30th of next year. Basically, what this means is that if you don't make any payments, or if you can't make payments during this next year, you're not going to be considered delinquent. You're not going to have like any negative credit reporting features. You won't be placed in default, and you won't be referred to any debt collection agencies. So that's the good thing. The downside of this is that, the interest will continue to accrue this whole next year. And I believe that if, you are seeking PSLF and you don't make payments, that time won't count towards public service loan forgiveness. So some things to consider. But it is nice that, there is this kind of year if you're if you're finding it very difficult to make these payments, that you won't be penalized in certain ways. The final thing is that President Biden announced this new payment plan called Saving on a Valuable Education. This is going to feature lower monthly payments. There's not going to be any kind of runaway interest that there's been in the past under this plan. And folks who borrowed less than $12,000 initially have an option to have their debt canceled if they've been in repayment for 10 years. So this is a sliding scale. So basically, if you borrowed less than $12,000 initially, after 10 years of being in repayment, so if you know that you've been in repayment for 10 years already, this will go into effect next July. And so, you'll get your debt essentially wiped out next July if you've been in repayment for 10 years. And this kind of bumps up. So, if, on a sliding scale. So if you borrowed, $13,000 initially, after 11 years in repayment, you'll get your debt canceled, or $14,000 in 12 years. So it kind of moves up that way. They couldn't have made the math any more difficult on this, but essentially it is a sliding scale. And I mention this too because maybe if you are one of these borrowers who did borrow less than $12,000 and you've been in repayment for 10 years, you might want to utilize this on-ramp period and not make payments for, the first 6 months of next year until this goes into effect. So it's a good idea to kind of weigh your options and see what's available to you. Some parts of this SAVE plan will be in effect or are already in effect. This is the bucket of things that is already in effect. So essentially they raised the income exemption from 150% of the federal poverty line to 225%, which means that folks are going to have much lower payments because it protects more of your income, basically. It also, as I mentioned, eliminates all of the runaway interest that was happening for both subsidized and unsubsidized loans after a payment is made. And then if you file your taxes separately from your spouse, it excludes that spousal income for this SAVE plan in particular. Now, there's another bucket of things that will be going into effect next year. Namely, if you only have undergraduate loans, you'll only have to pay 5% of your discretionary income instead of 10%, which will cut your payments in half. And then those who have a mixture of undergrad and graduate loans will have a weighted average somewhere between 5 and 10% of their discretionary income. So it should be, a bit lower for those folks as well. And then remember this shortened timeline to cancellation for borrowers with really low balances. So this again will take place next July. And, if you borrowed less than $12,000, you can receive full cancellation after 10 years of repayment, and then it bumps up from there. So some things to consider on the SAVE plan. If you want to get enrolled in the SAVE plan, you can go to studentaid.gov/IDR and check out your options there. You could also call your servicer and try to and enroll in the SAVE plan. And if you were already enrolled in the REPAY plan, you'll automatically be placed into the SAVE plan, because the SAVE plan is basically replacing the REPAY plan. So those are some of the ways that you can get into the SAVE plan if you are looking to do that. All right, we're finally at the end. Let's go into some important takeaways, and then we can get to some of your questions. All right, So remember what type, check what type of loans you have. Very important to figure out what you're eligible for and if you need to consolidate before December 31st. So log into studentaid.gov to figure that out. Check out your dashboard. Um, Consolidate your loans before December 31st if you have those commercial FFEL loans in order to take part in the IDR account adjustment. Or if you have non-direct loans and you're looking to get PSLF credit, consolidate before December 31st to keep all that credit. If you're seeking PSLF, remember to submit your PSLF forms. You can do this once a year and every time you change jobs in order to keep on track of it or to be on task. And then if you're looking to participate in Fresh Start because you're in default, take one of the action items within the next year. So either contact your guarantee agency and get on a repayment plan or request aid from an eligible school. Couple more notes, there's a lot moving right now in the student loan system. There's a lot of moving parts. So just make sure that you're getting information from a trusted source. Beware of scams. The Department of Education will never call you. They will always email you. And so if you're getting calls from folks, saying like, pay this money now and you'll get debt cancellation, that is likely a scam. So those are some red flags to kind of be aware of, but, get your information from studentaid.gov. We have a great resource that I'll be sharing out after this webinar, along with the recording. That's called cancelmystudentdebt.org. That has a lot of great resources on PSLF, the IDR account adjustment, a lot of the things we mentioned today and beyond. And then finally, if you experience any issues at all, please file complaints. You can file complaints with the Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson within the Department of Education, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and then also some states have ombudspersons at the state level, and I'll be sharing a list of those out tomorrow as well, that you can also file complaints at that level. These are really useful because the more complaints that folks receive on a given issue, the more likely they are to respond to it. And then they're also really helpful in shaping the policy of the future. People kind of lawmakers look to these databases and see what the issues are in order to figure out how to make policy better for the future. So highly encourage you to file complaints if anything happens. All right, ton of information. So let's get to your questions. Feel free to put them in the Q&A. I'm going to ask my colleague Ella to join us. Oh, thanks, Ella. Yeah, let's see what we have cooking.
Okay, well, it looks like we've only gotten one through so far. So if anyone else has a question, now's the time to submit them. So you, like Amy said earlier, use the chat function or the Q&A function. But we have one borrower, Donna, who says, I was told if I consolidate my Parent Plus loans that I would forfeit my current PSLF counts. So maybe you can speak to the ramifications of consolidating Parent Plus loans.
Yeah, absolutely. So Parent Plus loans are direct loans, so they technically already qualify for public service loan forgiveness. There might be other reasons that you might want to consolidate your Parent Plus loans. There's something also called double consolidation, where if you have Parent Plus loans and then other loans that maybe you took out for your education, or if you have two separate Parent Plus loans, you can kind of consolidate them once and then consolidate them again. We can share a resource on this as well. It's a little complicated, but you can essentially consolidate them twice to make them eligible for more repayment plans, so that you would be eligible for something like the SAVE plan. My understanding is that consolidating Parent Plus loans right now, you would not forfeit any PSLF counts. That is not true. So that is misinformation from your servicer, likely, is what I'm guessing. And so, you could file a complaint because that's certainly incorrect information. The nice thing about this moment in time is that Parent Plus borrowers can get credit through this IDR account adjustment, and that you will be able to keep all the credit on your loan, even if you consolidate. And so this is untrue. Elle, I'm not sure if you have anything to add here. I know you've done a lot of work on Parent Plus loans recently.
I'm just wondering, is there a deadline for like when to consolidate by to still maintain credit, PSLF credit? Is there a deadline for that?
So this deadline of December 31st is the deadline for everyone to keep in mind. This is the way to keep the maximum credit. All the credit that you've accrued on any loan up until now will be able to kind of keep that credit until December 31st. After that date, it'll be a weighted average of the payments that you've made on direct loans moving forward. So that's why consolidating right now is super like beneficial for folks. So yeah, please keep that deadline in mind and consolidate before the deadline if this applies to you.
Thanks, Amy. And for Donna, who submitted that question, if you have that in writing that this is what your servicer told you, feel free to submit it to our website because we are interested in keeping track of all the ways that servicers are distributing incorrect information. So yeah. Okay, we have another question. Says, where do seniors / co-signers go for hands-on help? This is overwhelming and confusing.
Yeah, I hear you. It is overwhelming and confusing. We don't disagree with you at all on that front. So I think that there are a few things. So for hands-on help, there are often legal aid organizations within your states or cities that might be able to help you. If you're in a state that has an ombudsperson, you could contact that ombudsperson to ask for like one-on-one help. The National Consumer Law Center also has a great list of providers within different states to check out. This will all be sent tomorrow in an email with the recording. And so those are kind of a few places that you could check out. We don't regularly like recommend any organizations or companies that do kind of one-on-one counseling where you'd be required to pay for that information. But I would check out some of our resources on cancelmystudentdebt.org. And then hopefully, between kind of the ombuds, that resource, the NCLC list, and some legal aids, maybe there would be someone who would be able to kind of give you one-on-one counseling. Unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to do that right now, but those are kind of some starting points that might be good to check out.
Thanks, Amy. As of now, you've answered all the questions, unless we want to wait a couple seconds, see if anyone has any other questions.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. One more came through. Where can all consumers / debtors work with to navigate this maze? Are you in contact with public libraries or law schools to help roll out this info to the public?
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, we are trying to tap every stone. And so, we have a cities partnership where we're working with about 12 cities across the country to kind of figure out how to get this information to borrowers in a more timely fashion that's organized. We do work with a lot of law schools across the country to kind of, maybe work with some of their clinics, do some research and reports. Libraries, we have less of an infrastructure there, but certainly looking to branch out into that. And then we partner a lot with advocacy organizations that kind of have a broad following so that we can get the word out too. So I guess all that is to say is that we, do our best to kind of get this information out to as many folks as possible. But certainly if you have ideas or contacts and you'd love us to kind of connect with those folks to get this out, we'd love to hear them. And so feel free to, when I email you tomorrow, if you want to respond to that email and we can connect on some other ideas. We'd love to, we're totally open to more partnerships because we recognize that there is a gap in information at this level. So yeah, thanks for that feedback.
And like Amy said earlier, the website cancelmystudentdebt.org is really a fantastic and I think pretty user-friendly, it breaks down the information to the most basic level so anyone can understand. So that I think that's a really great resource for anyone to use as well. And so Amy's done a fantastic job of spreading that around, I think.
Thanks, Ella.
Any other questions coming through? Yes, any resources to help private student debt holders? Yeah, Amy, go ahead. I know you have, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a great question. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of resources to help private student debt holders. That's why, like a lot of this present or all of this presentation pretty much is dealing with the federal student loan system. Federal student loans are about 92% of the loans out there, but the other 8% is these private student loans that we know are particularly pernicious, and don't have the same protections. So yeah, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of resources for these borrowers. This is something that we are continuing to think about and try to figure out what to do with. One of those things that we've been working on is some state legislation around this, and so pushing for bills in states that would better protect private student loan borrowers, protect cosigners, so that they can get released from these loans when they request it. So things like that. But we hear you. This is something we continue to think through and recognize that it is, really disastrous. Ella, I don't know if you have anything else to add on this front too.
No, it's you kind of said it all. And there is one page from as you mentioned before, the National Consumer Law Center that I tend to refer to for private student loan borrowers. I'll try and find it and drop it, or I don't know if you already have that link in your email that you're set to send out. So
Uh, if you send it to me, I can add it tomorrow to the
cool.
email if that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Karen says, what can we do to help you? Great question.
Oh my gosh, this is a great question. There are so many things. I think you can just continue speaking out, either through complaints or any kind of public forums where you're able to kind of share your voice. We collect student debt stories, and I know a lot of other organizations do that as well, but they're really powerful in shaping policy. There is this negotiated rulemaking session that is happening this fall. So the details on this aren't out yet, but borrowers are able to give testimony during this time. And so it's about a 3-minute segment that you're able to give testimony for. So if that's of interest, um, keep that in mind that, there are opportunities to give testimony at the federal level and then at the state levels, depending on where you live. We're running a lot of bills around the United States. So, but yeah, I would say just sharing your story and looking for opportunities to get involved. Ella, anything else to add on what they can do?
No,
Spread the
you
word too. Be ambassadors of this information, please.
totally.
Awesome.
All right.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining, everyone. Thanks for your questions and your attention. Look out for the email tomorrow with the recording and some resources. And feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. All right. Thanks so much, Ella. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great
Bye.
day.